Good. All right. Cool.
Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and introduce Mr. Jordan Rambis here and let him pontificate about himself, and then I'll step up.
Okay. I'll give a kind of brief background within esports. I put together a business plan, brought it to Peter Guber, who's part owner of the Warriors and Dodgers, pitched him on how I think we could make money within video games and esports. He gave it the thumbs up, partnered me with a guy, Bruce Stein, who's the former CEO of Sony Interactive, former COO and president of Mattel. And we created what's now Axiomatic Gaming. The first project I led was acquisition of Team Liquid, now the #1 grossing esport team in prize pool winnings in the world. We got investment from Disney, from founders of Groupon, AOL, Tony Robbins, Michael Jordan, long list like that. We were very lucky to have. We also invested in Epic Games, which makes Fortnite, Niantic, which made Pokemon Go. Left that, became the executive in residence for the city of LA for video games and esports, helping the city help video games companies that are based in LA and help video game companies based in LA help the city. So a few different projects we have going on. Also part owner now of Evil Geniuses, which is the second highest grossing esport team in the world in prize pool winnings. #1 Counter-Strike team in the world right now. Co-founded a company called 1337 Facilities, partnered with Oakview Group to help build gaming and just general entertainment facilities on college campuses. Advisor for Super League Gaming, which I think you probably know, and Fan AI, which is a data analytics tool. But there's sorry for going a little too long on that.
No, that's awesome. So Todd Conley, I live in Seattle, but haven't been there in about 4 weeks, just traveling around to conferences every day. But up in Seattle, we have the Pacific Northwest Esports Council, which is a similar role in the sense that we're there to try to promote and bring esports events of all shapes and sizes to the PNW and work with some of the local companies that are there. That we have a few companies that have popped up lately in the gaming industry: Microsoft, Amazon, Valve, and Nintendo, as well as some of the ones that drive mobile. And just a small connection that Evil Geniuses, the franchise that he co-owns, has some Seattle roots, and so that's actually how we ran into each other. My day job, I founded a company called highschool.gg. We have a middleschool.gg brand as well, but essentially right now we're focused on the K-12 market when it comes to esports as the next starting point. As somebody mentioned earlier, Jeff mentioned when we were just chit-chatting, there's about 400 schools that have some sort of esports presence. We're tracking over 220 schools in the market that have full ride scholarships available. Those are both junior colleges all the way up through four-year universities here in North America. My background in esports, in the 90s, I was called a cyber athlete. I was sponsored. I made full-time income that my parents didn't really understand from a company called Gateway 2000, and they flew me around the world with my 90-pound computer set up and monitor, and you could win prizes if you could beat me in a couple games back in the day. Now I'm too old. I don't have the reaction times to compete at that high level. So now I'm in the education business, and I really view that esports is a way to fundamentally change education and bring it back on track and make the teachers for 6 hours a day relevant in the eyes of the students. And there's really no other activity in school, including football, that has the mainstream reach and appeal today that esports or gaming does. So I'm helping spread that throughout education. Before we get too much further, especially since we have such a light crowd or a specially curated crowd here, I'd love to know what brings you guys in, because we have a lot of different ways we could go with this talk, and we want to make sure that it's relevant for you. So
maybe you guys have any questions?
Yeah.
To
But who understood everything that Jordan was talking about? Are we esports geeks here? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know much about esports, so that's why I'm here.
Okay. Anybody else just have a quick, 5-10 word summary of why you're here, what you're hoping to learn?
So,
If I can just,
I'm here to connect with people in esports. We're starting a new esports enterprise called Esports Circus, and so we're here to connect with people like you and expand what we're doing on esports. We're just launching a huge big thing, and we've got our new biggest event in January, which is at NAMM show.
Okay.
So we're doing that. So I'm here to connect with people, and we're launching that.
Okay, good. Well, just from looking at everybody's heads here, I guess we'll gloss over Esports 101. We don't need to spend too much time talking about that. I'll skip ahead. As far as streaming platforms, I mean, most of the content that I brought today is really geared towards explaining where streaming is at, especially in education. But biggest logo on there for a reason, just based on market share right now, is Twitch. But has everybody heard of some of these other platforms there in the middle? Mixer, obviously owned by Microsoft. They have the cash to potentially dominate Twitch in the not so distant future here. They've made some big acquisitions as of late as far as some of the top talent in the industry. A kid named Ninja, and then more recently a streamer named Shroud, who's arguably in second place. Then you've got some other platforms that kind of spawned out of the whole blockchain craze. You've got DLive and Sliver, both that have a local presence, as well as Caffeine, which has seen a lot of press lately, and again is a local startup with some good backing behind it. And then we definitely not discounting and forgetting about YouTube and Facebook. We'll get into that. Just a little terminology here. YouTube is still king when it comes to video on demand esports content. So when we're talking about streaming, we're talking about live production. I think it's important to note here that both Twitch and Mixer have all the functionality that YouTube does under the covers to host video on demand. It's just for whatever reason, whether it's through user experience or users' capability, people tune to certain platforms for their on-demand content and other platforms for that live functionality. And as of now, there's not anybody in the market that's been able to figure out both. Say, YouTube has tried that live functionality and quite hasn't figured out how to compete with Twitch there. And Twitch isn't necessarily making an effort towards that VOD content, but I think that's definitely going to be some competition in the future.
YouTube's mobile live streaming actually does extremely well. But yeah, Twitch is definitely the market owner for just general live.
Yeah, and I think, in my opinion, just from spending time internally at Twitch or I should say at Amazon and Microsoft in former careers here, I don't see that 90% market share staying that high. I think we'll reach some sort of equilibrium, just observing all the parties at play here. A little bit about the high school and collegiate landscape. There's from the data that was collected at the beginning of the school year, this is just kind of our own internal data, there's 220 colleges that have some sort of Twitch channel established. I think it's important to note that less than 40 of those schools are live more than 4 times a week. There's about 2,500 high schools in the country that have some sort of gaming club or team. There's 20,000 high schools total in the country, both public and private. Less than 1,000 of those schools have a Twitch or Mixer channel established. And as far as we can tell, less than 10 of those high schools in the country are live more than 4 days a week. Mixer adoption is slow right now in education, but again, they've made some plays to attempt to change that. But I think most importantly, most of the things that have been done in education related to live streaming have been pushed by Twitch, as Twitch does have some full-time resources dedicated specifically towards students and education, whereas we don't see that with any of the other platforms right now.
Yeah, the guys at Twitch have made it a pretty valiant effort in both helping students who want to become streamers understand what tools they need and what experience they need to actually not only start streaming, but then also have careers in streaming. Yeah, and Twitch, they have boots on the grounds. Pretty much every major university has some sort of relationship with Twitch.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the history, it's kind of now intertwined into the curriculum at the collegiate level, and some of those Twitch staffers are the ones that consulted on that curriculum in the first place. High school and collegiate production value. There's obviously a wide range of production quality that's out there. There's also a wide range of resources that are people resources that are putting together the productions in the first place. And I think one thing that applies in all industries, but especially we see it here, is more money and resources doesn't necessarily mean better production value. That's more about the people and talent behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about streaming gaming is if you put a green screen behind, you can make it whatever you want, as you guys all know, for streaming. So I think a lot of the production within esports is trying to get the production look like a traditional sport, and they spend money on flamethrowers and this and that. But it's not an audience that really, it's cool, but they don't really care about that. They grew up on people live streaming on their phone, right? And just, cat videos and stuff that were filmed on their phone. So in terms of actually having a high production value in gaming, it doesn't necessarily mean a high production cost as it does in traditional.
Yeah, and I do have a video that I'll skip over, but we can play at the end if we run out of awesome questions. It highlights Boise State University, who I'd say does have some of the highest production value in the collegiate space right now, and it goes in a bit into their setup, which is still definitely on the inexpensive end compared to, say, a local TV affiliate. For those production geeks in the room, I think it's important to note that this industry is heavily dominated by the use of some open source software to get things going. Especially, you got to remember that most of these streamers are a one-man show. So based on our survey results of colleges, we have, who's heard of OBS? Okay, so we've got OBS. Who's heard of Slobs or SLOBS? So that's Streamlabs OBS. So this company called Streamlabs at the time that wasn't owned by Logitech took this open source software and put a new skin on it, made it a little more user friendly, pared down some features and released it towards the streamers. But then your vMix, your Wirecast, et cetera, have a fairly small market share, which the way I see it, that's an opportunity. But we do see some of the bigger colleges have started to go that route, especially if they have some sort of existing broadcast program.
One thing to maybe touch on that side in terms of software is also there's a lot of plugins as well in terms of integrating with streams where users can kind of dial in and you can send out different images. Like let's say if someone donates, there's other kind of pieces like that it's really about engagement to grow a following. So you really want to get your fan base as kind of dialed in and engaged on your stream as you can. So there's a lot of third-party tools that do that. And there's also some third-party tools. I'm trying to think of one that's like live something, but there's one that's Mixer, or no. What are some of the multi-broadcasts?
Oh, you're
Not
talking
stream,
about,
Restream.io, where you can actually send it out to YouTube, Facebook, everything concurrently.
Yeah, so I think what Jordan's bringing up is that if you look at a traditional, say, Wirecast package or something like that, it wasn't built with the idea of interactive television in mind. And whereas if you look at OBS and all these plugins that are mentioned, it's really a two-way data flow that's happening all the time, and the end user, the viewer, is really providing and iterating on a lot of that content that makes its way into the broadcast. And that's why I think we see this kind of extensible plug-in ecosystems and OBS still running strong. Just a little bit more about the gear there. I think you all have kind of looked at that slide long enough. I just think it's important to mention that there's a lot of $50 off-the-shelf commodity hardware that's used, even in some of the more professional broadcasts. I still see when I'm going and setting up for some major events, I still see you can tell the difference between someone that started their broadcast career in esports or came from, as I call it, T-sports or traditional sports. But at the end of the day, they're all producing the same signal, and most of the use cases are not even consuming a full 1080p 60 stream. Even if you think you are on your fancy 4K phone, most of the providers are cutting that down. So here's just some of the off-the-shelf gear. I'll skip through that slide, but this is the gear that we use for a high school Overwatch production, which consists of north of 40 camera angles, you could think about it, but it's all done with NDI. Or who's familiar with NDI? Of course you are, because you're young. Okay. Jeff as well, because he's building that into his broadcast trucks. But just a couple things to point out here. This is Overwatch is a game that involves 12 people sitting on a stage playing a match, if you will. There's 6 on one team and 6 on the other team, so you've got 6 computers. They all have little commodity webcams on top there. They've got their headsets where they're doing the game audio. And down there in the bottom left is kind of depicted 3 monitors. It's a video mixing workstation, if you will. There's just an IP or a PoE switch that's powering everything, because there's usually a couple other cameras in the network. In this case, we're leveraging some PoE cameras that send back NDI video and give either the audience or the production the ability to mess around with that pan tilt zoom functionality. I'd say that's at the high end of the collegiate and high school productions. Kind of in the middle range, you've got either prosumer or consumer level cameras, anything that has a HDMI output, whether that's a GoPro or in this case, that's a cheapo Panasonic GH2. It's one of the cheapest DSLRs in the market that has clean HDMI out. So that's a $200 device, goes into a $100 HDMI capture device back into your box, and now you've got any sort of nice lens you want to put onto that. In the bottom right, there's the observer machine. Who doesn't know what a observer machine is in esports? Okay, well, thanks for raising your hand. An observer is a virtual cameraman. So almost all the games, there's actually another person that logs into the game, but instead of being one of the competitors, they're flying around a camera throughout the map or the environment in the game. And so that you can think of that as the main sideline camera, but that camera can instantly teleport somewhere else in that game that's taking place. So that's really one of the feeds that's used a lot. And then you've got your real life cameras, if you will, that are capturing the players' faces or some of those moments and high fives and things that happen.
It's one of the
in between.
Sorry. It's one of the harder things about an esport broadcast, because if you're looking at a traditional sport broadcast, there's a ball. So if you're, let's say for the announcers that are talking about the game, they're following it. Everyone's looking at the same thing, right? In terms of a esport match, like let's say League of Legends, there's 3 different primary lanes, 5 champions playing on 3 lanes, where there might be simultaneous action. So there has to be a lot of coordination with whoever is running as the observer and the shoutcasters calling the game. The more amateur streams will have the same person doing both, which makes it easier. But then as it goes on, you're trying to check with what's going on throughout the entire map. So there are some, while a lot of the tech and stuff that's coming out makes it a lot easier to stream an esport match than it would be a traditional sport match, the actual content can be more difficult to follow at times, just because of all the simultaneous action There are some games that have a ball like Rocket League, but for the most part, most of them have simultaneous action during the stream.
You know, yeah, I guess you can. Yeah, it's funny that question was brought up. I had a meeting with the Mariners, Major League Baseball, and we had some kids that had experience at the collegiate level observing for this game called Counter-Strike. They came into the production room during a baseball game, and an hour later, these guys pulled me aside and said, we want them to be our directors during the game day, because they were seeing all the cameras, and they were quickly able to follow all that action and saying, hey, you should be pulling up this angle, this angle, this angle. So they're used to doing that, but for the most part, that's done from one workstation, if you will, just based on the fact that it's all rendered in software. But there are definitely multiple people during a professional esports broadcast who are assigned to different roles with observing. And again, it's hard to quantify and explain, because explaining esports is like if I was to explain how you did camera work for cricket and rugby and track and field and every other Olympic sport, because there's just such a variety of games that are out there. Rocket League, for example, which is soccer with a remote-controlled car, that has a pretty advanced AI you could think of that follows the action. So a lot of times the casters can do that job by themselves, where then like I'd say on the far end, Counter-Strike, for example, there are people that make their full-time income traveling the world just focusing on observing the field of play, or the map, and knowing where the action is, so that they're capturing that important moment in real time. And then you also have folks that are involved with replays and all that. So as far as the crew that's sitting in the truck, if you will, it's kind of a similar need for the number of bodies. They might just embody different roles, whereas your cameraman, you don't have someone that is just a cameraman and then someone else is choosing when to expose that cameraman's angle. Usually the cameraman is kind of part of the action, if you will.
Yeah. And it's tough because each game is different. So for League of Legends, which, by the way, a lot of these, that's former producers for the Olympics and some of the top live broadcast companies out there, they only actually take the same perspective from the game for 99% of coverage. Maybe if there's like a cool little shot of an arrow shooting long distance, they'll pull that. But for the most part, 99% of what you're going to see is how a player would see the game. So you'll have a few different observers watching some of the key moments, and it's just like any other broadcast booth where you have the director in there, ready camera two, cut to this feed, cut to that guy. But then there's other games like he was talking about, Counter-Strike and Overwatch and Call of Duty coming out, where I think Call of Duty is actually trying to make it more of a kind of sports feel. So there's just where they'll have like camera guys almost kind of stationed out in there. So it's not a typical viewpoint that a player would have, but one more specifically for viewing it as an esport.
Who handles the replays?
Yeah, so I mean, there's observers that are the cameramen, if you would, and then there's a director in there kind of letting them know where to position it or who to put as the main feed.
Yeah. Well, where is it called up from? OBS? Like, is it recorded or is it inside the game?
So it depends on the game,
Yeah.
but certain games have replay functionality embedded where you'll go back inside the game engine and bring that up. And then in other games, you are essentially recording multiple views or observers, if you want to think of it that way, and producing your own replays.
Yeah, yeah. Like some they actually they save the data of the game for the replay, so you can go wherever. And then other ones, like he said, it's just recorded from your perspective. But most of the esports production is live. Just like traditional sports, there's not that.
Yeah, and I think if you're a a school or even a professional team that's broadcasting esports, if you're to the point where you're producing your own replays, then you're probably out of the OBS ecosystem, or OBS is now just a tool in a larger production workflow. I see vMix is kind of the next stepping stone that has some of that replay functionality baked in, where you're likely to maybe see a blue screen if you start messing around with OBS and some of the experimental replay and advanced functionality.
But to your point, as a streamer, if this isn't a live event production and you're just some streamer at home, a lot of times they'll stream live, and then afterwards they'll take that recorded stream, chop it up. Like, let's say Ninja, he'll maybe make like 10 different VODs of one stream, where again, he's recorded his entire broadcast, and he'll go back and do some overlays and do this and do a couple effects, and then post that as a VOD after.
And I think it's important to have you heard the term clipping? So one thing that definitely happens in esports, or the Twitch universe more so than traditional sports now, is you crowdsource your highlights. So when you've done something on stream, you're sitting there for 6 hours, you get a shout out, hey, clip this. Well, people are sitting there in their computers and are naturally going to go ahead and scrape the last 30 seconds of whatever just came across the air, and they're going to post that in a social manner. So there's a lot of tools. There's entire companies that are built out around that functionality. It's also integrated both to GPU drivers at this point, as well as Windows itself is Microsoft's making a play. So there's and again, it's just all stuff in the software layer that isn't quite possible today, via traditional OTT and T-sports in general. And I think it's coming, but right now, esports is kind of the innovator in that space.
We got a question?
Yeah, so we're shooting, I know a lot of the productions are live, but what do you think is the value for ISO recording each camera for to re-edit it and maybe post it for highlights or redo that?
So I think that there's tremendous value in gathering as much footage as possible. Now, from a cost perspective, what we're doing at the college and high school level, that's often cost prohibitive, or maybe it's a knowledge thing on part of the crew that's putting it together. But what I don't want to see is something where the only impression I have of a user's face is a 160 degree little box or 160 pixel box, because that's how that camera was put out there across the internet. So for me, that's important. I'll say that it doesn't happen. I'm at some of the big 7-figure, 8-figure production value events that does happen, but again, that's an afterthought in most of the small productions that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, for practicality purposes, it might just be overkill. I mean, we always got to keep in mind that this is still very much the early stages, even though these numbers are pretty incredible in terms of just what esports garners. It's one of those things where now the professional is built, now we're going back and looking at the amateur again. How can we build out this ecosystem? And all the publishers see this as extremely valuable, because it's not just a breeding ground for the pros, but more importantly, a breeding ground for the people who are going to play their game. So they definitely want to get there, get involved. And in terms of viewership, if you look, like March Madness is really what made college basketball explode, and we've yet to have that sort of explosion of viewership in esports. There's a lot of companies that are doing some great things. Like Blizzard has a company, Tespa, that they're trying as quickly as possible to really professionalize the collegiate esports scene. But I think even Tespa, I think they only have like 20,000 users, which is still a lot of college students participating. Correct? I might be wrong on that.
You're right, and especially from a viewership perspective, we still haven't seen an instance of where anything other than a solo person production is more monetizable or more popular than any of these productions that involve a crew of 2 to 100 people. So we have some large scale events that are popular in the pro scene, but as of now, there's people watch the celebrities, which are these solo streamers, the Ninja Shroud, Dr. Disrespect, those types of folks, and we don't yet have that affinity. When I'm a Bruin or I'm a Trojan, as an alum there, I'm not tuning in to watch my college team because I have an affinity for the colors of that school. But I think we're definitely seeing that start, as we do have some donors that have stepped up with 7-figure donations to universities to get started. I just toured a university the other day with a $7 million facility. There's a number of universities that have $3-4 million facilities, and as that gets going and there's more and more endowed scholarships, I think we'll start seeing that community of boosters and everything else that comes with traditional sports, and then those viewership numbers will rise. I think the one thing to keep in mind, as far as especially at the high school level, when we go and we do a program within a school district, we consistently double the in-person fans for our finals versus their homecoming football game. So to put that in perspective, we've sold out a 1,900 seat theater for a couple weeks in Compton for a game called Overwatch. That's just 2 high schools competing against one another. So this is a fan-friendly viewing experience at the school rivalry level. As far as translating that into online views, there's a lot of competition for those eyeballs, and right now people would rather be watching either their favorite personalities or their professionals that are performing at the highest level of the game. But what excites me is not necessarily the viewership for those kids. It's the fact that for every one kid that's on stage competing, there's another 10 kids behind the scenes that are doing the shoutcasting, the commentating, learning the rigging in the theater, of learning the DMX lighting, who did the marketing, they designed the jerseys, so they take on all these roles that are essential for event production. And there's such an opportunity for that to translate into real careers, not only in esports or traditional sports, but in all sorts of relevant pathways out there. I'll skip that slide. That was just me selling you all on NDI because I think it's transformational. The only one thing I'll point out here is when we have our state championship coming up in California, we have kids, example, Overwatch 6 versus 6, so those are 12 kids competing. But then there's going to be 10 broadcast teams that are all competing on the broadcast for that one match. And that's only possible because of NDI. I can't take 14 miles of SDI cables and somehow figure out how to present those same cameras to 10 different broadcast trucks. But I can do it all multicast across the network and allow all these kids to compete in the art of production. So that's why I think timing is great with Twitch and everything kind of moving into the IP layer. Any sort of vendors, hardware folks, integrators, anybody coming from broadcasting, there is a tremendous opportunity to get involved now at the educational level. I mean, we have programs all the way down to 5th and 6th grade. I mean, 5th is rare, but traditionally middle school's 6th grade in the U.S. And you wouldn't believe, when I had to address some of the gender equality issues that are you can think about with esports, my solution was middle school girls broadcasting. So for a lot of the districts we work with, we have teams of middle school girls that are out producing the events for the high school varsity teams, which are not boys teams, but for the most part are dominated by males. We see about less than 30% female participation right now, and we're working to level out the playing field there. But just lots of opportunity for both in the software and hardware and staffing ecosystem to get involved. These are kids that might not know that they want to have a career in broadcasting or production, but when esports is the hook to get them in the door, then they can quickly iterate with a lot of good hardware and mentorship that you all can provide to make that happen. So,
Do we want to do like a Q&A for the last 10 minutes?
yeah.
Does anyone? If not, we can go back to it, but just seeing if there's any kind of burning questions out there.
So I've seen in different high schools and middle schools, video game design or
Mhm.
game design. Have not seen esports necessarily as a and I'm in North Carolina, so how would you approach a school system about trying to integrate or offer more esports as a
Well, there's.
instruction?
Sure. So I mean, I'm actually working with some schools in Raleigh. So there's there are pockets of schools that are doing the whole. There are a large quantity of schools that are focusing on esports just as an after-school sport activity, and then there are pockets of districts that have embraced it as a whole curriculum. So that's where we come in. So I can point you to schools that are already doing this in your area. You happen to have some of the biggest gaming IP, in your area. Epic actually has a grant program that's specifically designed to address this issue, as Unity has the market share in K-12 as far as educational resources. So as Epic looks to bring Unreal back up, there's a number of grants available specifically around game design and broadcast and production. So we're working with them, and I'd be happy to connect you.
Yeah, you're seeing kind of like, from what I was talking to, it's kind of grassroots at some schools. There will be a traditional class, like let's just say a sports broadcasting class, that is now integrating some esports knowledge or curriculum into that. And then on the other side, again, some of the guys at Twitch, they have 4 or 5 different esport curriculums in terms of production versus esport team management and all these. I forget if Twitch had that one or if someone else did, but being a team manager, being an agent within esports, all these different aspects of the industry are starting to that have parallels to the traditional counterpart. You're starting to see either those traditional counterparts starting to add in esports curriculum or become their own standalone classes. But again, it's really an explosion at the moment, but it's still, like I said, very, very early on. So I think eventually most schools will have some sort of esport curriculum. But yeah, for the time being, it's not everywhere.
Yeah, it's hit or miss, but let's put it this way: for when we go into a district and sell our curriculum or comprehensive program, if you will, we say that there's 36 different competitions that the kids compete in. Only one of them is actually playing game. So there's 35 other things that they're competing in. For example, making an iOS app for a Fortnite leaderboard in their school, or the DMX lighting example we mentioned. So there's so many different 21st century skills, that's the education buzzword now, that can be learned from esports as a starting point. We see upticks in culinary program participation because we added a food and beverage component to an esports tournament, right? So there's just a lot of ways to activate students that are perfectly smart and just not necessarily motivated to get going.
And one thing to keep in mind as well is gaming is $140 to $160 billion industry. Esports is, they say it's around $1 billion. It might be a good amount less, but video games being that behemoth that's bigger than music, TV, and film combined, that's why you're seeing all the different curriculum kind of based around that in terms of graphic design and engineering. But again, as esports is growing 30% year over year, you'll see that as well.
Yes, sir.
At the university level, which departments are driving esports or supporting it? Is it athletics, communications?
So it depends on the university. one of the things we're doing at the facility construction company is having not completely bespoke approach, but having a few different approaches to it, because there is the varsity. If it's athletic, it tends to be some sort of varsity program. Club and all these, they're more kind of towards the student union a lot of the times. Like when we're looking to build, normally it's not just their esports team practice room. It's more of a high-end computer lab that can be rearranged to have, an arena type setting. I would probably say student union is the most popular at the moment. And then after that, again, for the varsity programs, that the athletic will take over for that.
Yeah, and it really varies because, again, this is not an NCAA mandated or sanctioned activity. Even the NACE organization that has the most schools, you could argue, at the collegiate level, that's an NAIA front, if you will, but it's still not a NAIA mandated activity. So there's usually a champion in the university, and depending on what sort of department they're in, that's how it gets started. So, just in my neck of the woods, Boise State, the coach, if you will, he's the chair of the Department of Education. Therefore, the School of Education houses their program. University of Washington, it's Student Life, the student activities group, and
one's TV and film.
Yep.
There was a school that was in the TV and film department, or some of the I think that was because it was within the game design was underneath that. So again, yeah, a lot of the time, since it's still grassroots, it is one person that just wants to build an esport program for their school, and it's just the schools are open to it because it's great in terms of reading in STEM students, or obviously targeted towards STEM students, which tend to be the best donors, which schools tend to want those. So yeah. Yep,
and there are a couple, I'd say, well-known business school names around the country that are looking to get involved, especially when you look at your student life types of organizations don't necessarily have the largest budget. So when it does come time to build a facility with somebody like Jordan, then that's where you really do need some sort of college within the university to step up and take ownership if it's not going to be the athletic department. Any other questions? These are all awesome. I know my man's a gamer back here, so you've got to have a question.
It's more about getting more involved in it.
Okay, well, we can definitely talk offline about that. How are we doing on time?
I think we're
Oh,
there.
we're right at
Yeah, I was
time.
gonna
Okay.
say, yeah.
Well, hey, thanks everyone for attending and hearing us out.